Hello and welcome to Growing Tech Fast, the condensed Org3D podcast where we talk about growing tech startups with those who have grown them. Today I'm joined by Girish Redekar, founder and CEO of Sprinto. Girish, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a pleasure. So for the benefit of our audience, Girish, I always like to start off by you just giving us a brief intro into who you are, what your mission is, and the work you're doing at the moment.
Oh, great. So like you mentioned, I'm Girish. I'm primarily a developer first. I think of myself that way, though I look at sales right now. And so I've been programming for more than 15 years now. At Sprinto, what we try and do is we help other B2B SaaS companies get these compliances like SOC 2, ISO 27001, etc., which are primarily useful for our customers to close high ticket deals. For anybody who's in the sales space would probably recognize this. This is an important thing, especially when you're trying to close high ticket deals. Getting these deals closed usually takes months. These compliances usually takes months. What we do is we automate a bunch of things that would otherwise require manual effort and get you there in the matter of, sometimes in days or whatever it might take, but it usually takes 1/10 of the effort. So that's roughly what we do. This is my second SaaS company. Before this, I ran another B2B SaaS company called Recruitment. Grew it to more than 2,500 customers, most of who were in the US and UK, I think. We first faced the problem that I'm currently solving in my previous company, and I'm guessing that happens often, and that's roughly how we are here.
Cool, perfect. So, yeah, you kind of had a problem you needed solving, and then luckily, being a coder, you have the skill set to actually just go out and create something to fix it, basically.
Yeah, something like that.
So there's a few things to kind of dive into there. Now, something that, when you told me that you had done most of the coding work yourself with Sprinto in previous conversations, that's what that really jumped out at me. And coming from sales myself, I'm aware of how much rejection there is in sales, right? And how much people tell you no and they're not interested. It's hard to not take that personally, but I was keen to know, having actually built the product yourself that you're also trying to sell, how much harder does that hit when you get rejected by somebody who doesn't want to buy the product?
Truth is, it was hard, especially early on. I think it was a perfect storm where no one really knew us, and so it was hard to build credibility. So early sales is always hard, but it was also the time when I think I was green as a salesperson and woefully unequipped. So this perfect storm happened where naturally things weren't going as well, and I was probably dealing with more rejection than what a good salesperson would, and it was a bit of a vicious cycle. The good news is that we had actually built an insanely good product, and that got us through our early sales. And I had help from an amazing team that we have here, and it's sort of like a couple of months later, we were soon dealing with enough customer conversations and so many customer conversations that I just didn't have the time to deal with rejection. It soon went from a phase where we were fighting for each deal to a phase where I was worrying about, whether I'm dropping the ball on something. And basically I didn't have any time to mope around. So I guess that helped a little bit where I just didn't have enough time to think about, hey, we got rejected there and so on and so forth. So hard first few months, and then it sort of just became like a blur for me.
It's good advice. Yeah. So create so many opportunities that you don't even have time to dwell on the ones that don't go your way. Yeah, it's a good strategy, definitely. So do you think that having actually created that product yourself, it gave you more ammunition when going into a sales situation because you could talk them through every detail of the nuts and bolts of the solution?
Yeah, that helped. So the inherent nature of a program of a product is also that I'm typically talking to a CTO on the other side, especially in smaller companies. So that's a profile I understand. So it's very easy to at least get into the nitty-gritties of, like why exactly is this that way and so on and so forth. But it had a little bit of a downside too. I was too eager to just, show and tell and look at this insanely great thing that we have built. So I remember that one of the things I had to teach myself early on was to talk less and hear more and listen more. So I'm pretty sure if I look at some of my early conversations, I'll cringe at them. But yeah, it was a little easier in the sense that I could at least relate to the specific problems that are like the counterpart on the other side was talking about. So that context helped for sure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So an area that you had to kind of develop as part of that sales skill set, I suppose, was that active listening piece. And something that I always try and tell myself in that situation is I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I should be using them in roughly that ratio.
Exactly.
Which is hard to remember sometimes. So how did you kind of go about really trying to hone those sales skills? Was there someone you were learning from, or was it all just kind of trial and error? What was your process for improving that part of your skill set?
It was mostly the latter. However, we were like what happens in most sales calls today. You sort of record these calls, and there are ways for you to know, like how much time did you spend talking versus your prospect. And I think at least at a very high level, I was trying to keep track of, hey, I shouldn't be talking more than them, which was a good benchmark to get to, given my early calls were like 80% of the times I was talking. So that sort of was a good thing to get towards. But I think I just started jotting down more notes, noticing whenever they mentioned something that was a very specific need for them, or they sort of hinted at a very specific anxiety they had, or they say this thing in a certain manner which tells you that, hey, this is something that they really care about. And I think that was something that I just trained myself to do more and more and more. Like just keep a notepad and write, especially when something like that jumps out. So that was a very organic process. It was something that I had to do myself, but I had help.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Cool. And obviously, your background before being sales focused is in engineering, and it's in sort of, I guess, starting with a blank page and a problem, and then coding something that will fix that problem, right? And similarly with sales, it's a case of finding out what the problem is, and then you're just trying to solve that problem until you get to the end. So how much overlap do you think there is in those skill sets? What about engineering has actually been a strength for you as a salesperson?
Oh, wow. I'm not really sure if there was anything that I could, directly translate that way. Like obviously the two things don't look very similar on the surface. Like programming and coding is a little bit about getting to know, getting computer to do what you want. And most of the times you're just visualizing how data flows through your program. And you spend a lot of time thinking about structure and how to organize it, and, what should go where. And I'm no expert on sales by a wide margin, but to me, if programming was about figuring out programs, sales was a little bit about figuring out people, which is it seems obvious in hindsight, but that's not the way I was thinking about it. And, like in a conversation, people are always telling you a little bit more about what their problem is, but not directly. So you got to be a little bit more, like I think you mentioned the word active listening. That I really like that phrase, and I didn't exactly know how to describe it, but so thanks for that. But people are telling you through minute ways, what their biases are, what their anxieties are, why they haven't solved this problem already, what happened when the last time they attempted to solve it. In some way, they're always telling you how they're thinking about this. And I think the part that I got eventually a little bit better at is about visualizing how someone is thinking about the problem. And to me, then sales is about, speaking to how they think, rather than, just talking about some spiel that I have ready and I'm just going to blurt it out like a tape recorder. So I think that was the main part. So whenever I'm talking to her, whenever I'm in a sales conversation, I now try to at least draw like a mental map of how they are thinking about this. And, where is it that they have faced a problem before, or what specifically it is about this that have made them uncomfortable in solving this before, etc. And that's very useful. So I at the end of the day, both programming and sales comes to having the right mental model. my mental model currently for doing sales is this. So I'm not sure if it happened because I have an engineering background or otherwise, but this is what works for me right now.
Cool. Yeah. And it sounds like it's still developing with every conversation as well, which I think from my perspective is one of the most important skills of someone in sales, is to just, if you can just keep learning and improving with every single interaction and building that model up, then you'll keep getting better, basically. And it sounds like that's been your approach and that's what you're still doing. So in terms of previous experience, then I want to talk about your time at RecruiterBox and kind of learn a bit more about that journey. You mentioned it at the top end of the call. I know that you really grew that company out successfully. So I'd love to just kind of know what that journey looked like, really, and how that started and how it came to an end through an acquisition.
Yeah, it was a bit of a wild ride, especially at the beginning. My current co-founder, Raghu, and I started RecruiterBox too, and we were super naive then. I think around that time we worked on a ton of ideas and we built many unsuccessful things before we built RecruiterBox. And I think the most important thing there was that we actually built things. So some background there. Both Raghu and I had never professionally programmed before. We weren't computer science grads, and our jobs before that were largely being spreadsheet and PowerPoint jockeys. So so I think the first order of business for us was to teach ourselves programming, which happened as we were going through all those failed projects. At the end of the whole thing, we at least knew how to program, and that was a huge and a useful thing when RecruiterBox actually came around. So we built a very early version of RecruiterBox, put it out there. It started getting traction, and we had another co-founder join us at the time, which was immensely useful. And then from there on, sort of never looked back. And I think it took us about a year to get to probably like our first handful of customers, right from the time that we started building the product and started putting it out. But from there on, we sort of just went on a very fast growth, primarily which was fueled by inbound signups. So we sort of found a sweet spot where people would sign up for RecruiterBox, go through like a 14-day free trial, try out the product, they like it, and they used to sort of convert it to paying customers. And that remained the backbone of the business till the very end. So we had about, I think, 70 to 80% of our customers who used to become customers without ever talking to a human ever in the sales process.
Wow.
So, among other things, what that meant is that we had to learn how to build great onboarding in the product. So I think we built onboarding before we knew the word onboarding. We just felt that, hey, there's this person who's found RecruiterBox on the internet, and they have no clue what RecruiterBox is like and what it works like and how it solves this problem. So you need to sort of guide them through a process where they understand how this actually works, rather than just leaving them on a dashboard, like just clicking around and trying to figure this thing out. So I think that was one of the things that we did pretty well at RecruiterBox. And so our growth was mostly fueled by inbound leads in SEO. We found a sweet spot primarily in the US as a market. Like I was saying earlier, 80% of our customers were in the US and UK. And we sort of ran that for about 7 years before we sold the business to a private equity firm in the US. So that was a wild ride, bunch of learnings. Among other things, RecruiterBox was a bootstrap business, which meant that we ended up doing a bunch of things in a hands-on manner. So in the beginning, it was programming, then it was product development, design, sales, marketing, you name it. One of us has probably been, hands-on on it at some point in time. So that was one of the useful thing about running RecruiterBox.
Wow, yeah, sounds like you learned a lot through that journey. And also cliche that I hear a lot that is true about startups is you've got to be able to wear many hats. And I think you really you really kind of encapsulate that phrase of wearing many hats, because first you build it and then you sell it and you do a bunch of other things along the way as well.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there as well that you built a few things that kind of didn't work out and you experimented with a few things. Were there any standout failures from that time that you attribute a specific sort of lesson to, for example?
Oh, my simple biggest lesson there is that, as a programmer, when you think of something and your immediate next, idea is to try and build it. And one of the things that we did at Sprinto is that we said that, okay, we are not going to program until we validate this problem is real. So just to paint an opposite of what we did at Recruiterbox is in Sprinto, we actually had like about I don't know, like we had about like 50 interviews. We actually spoke to people trying to validate whether this thing is real, because we knew we could build this. The more important thing is to know whether this is useful, which is exact opposite of what we were doing early on. Around the time we were doing Recruitbox, like we used to like sit and we used to think, hey, this sounds like a great idea, and half an hour later we just typing into our keyboards, building this thing out, and then like a few weeks or a couple of months later, we have something that actually works, but it doesn't actually as exciting or as interesting to like a customer or a prospect. And we went through those cycles many times. So I think my single largest lesson there is that what seems exciting to you may not necessarily be useful for someone else. So it's good to have some way of validating what you're building, even if it means that you're building it quickly and putting it out there quickly. That's also a completely fair way of validating it, but making sure you validate whatever you're building early is my biggest lesson from Recruiterbox.
Yeah. So not only worrying about whether you can do something, but whether you should do something, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then that was obviously technology that was quite disruptive in the recruitment space, and you've now moved into this cybersecurity space, which is kind of very different. So what kind of gave you the ability and the confidence to kind of make that jump from industry to industry?
So again, personal experience. So we faced this problem in Recruiterbox. One of the things that happened in Recruiterbox is that we were often getting asked for these compliances like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, and GDPR became big around 2017 or so. So all of these things were happening around the while. And I remember that we actually hired like a consultant to help us get through these compliances. And the person spent like about 6 months in our company, and we derailed like a bunch of other engineering projects, so just so we could make space for this, and we burnt our fingers with it. I wouldn't say it was a very pleasant experience. So in some way we were scarred by that entire thing. And when we were looking at other ideas to build, this was one of the experiences that we could sort of connect forward to. We could say that, hey, this is something that was painful for us, is potentially painful for other folks, and like something that we need to that we could look into. So of the half the dozen ideas that we sort of shortlisted, this was one of them. And then we sort of interviewed a bunch of people and we validated it was right. But that's how the jump from something like recruiting to cybersecurity happened. It was primarily because we ran a SaaS company before this, and so we had to validate or we had some insight into the kind of problems that SaaS founders and SaaS teams would face.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, makes sense. And so heading into sort of the rest of this year, obviously there's been so many changes and so many big sort of news items happening at the moment. What do you think are the biggest challenges that companies are going to be facing in the near future in terms of just being compliant?
So I think the largest thing that we probably anybody who is in the SaaS or just a cloud services space is going to see is that compliances are simply becoming more and more common. This is something that used to happen only when you were selling to like a Fortune 1000 deal or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's increasingly becoming more and more common, even if you're doing like just 5-figure deals and so on and so forth. So the second thing that I'm seeing is that there used to be a time when you are compliant with SOC 2, and that's good enough for the most part. But I'm increasingly seeing that companies need like a wider range of these compliances, like SOC 2, there's this ISO 27001, and every country seems to have its own privacy laws. Canada has PIPEDA, we have GDPR in Europe, we have CCPA in California. I think India is coming up with its own privacy laws and so on and so forth. So there's just like a complete explosion of the number of things that you need to be compliant with. And the fact is that running this process manually will derail your product building. So you have to find a way as a company to try and do this in a manner that doesn't hurt your engineering or your product building. So in spite of doing all of this work, you are going to get asked by your customers about some specific questions about your security, because at the end of the day, SaaS means that my data is on your servers, and I want some assurance that you're keeping this data safe and secure. So over and above, just looking at these compliances as check boxes that you need to tick in order to close your sales, you are eventually going to have to run like a good security program and not just look at this as a checkbox. So I guess what I'm getting at is that at some point now or in the next couple of years, we're going to see more and more SaaS companies having to make the mental shift to think of compliances as an integral part of their growth. This was something that used to be on the fringes, and it's soon going to become fairly mainstream. And that's something that companies will have to get used to. That this is going to become as common a piece of software or the common a piece of tool that you need to have, like an HRMS or something like that. So you are going to see a lot more of this, is my bet.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Interesting as well how it's becoming so much more common for everyone as well. And yeah, GDPR coming in seemed to really pave the way for more and more privacy laws becoming a thing. And obviously it's changed in the UK even more recently with the cookies that are available and opting in rather than opting out and all of that. So yeah, it's certainly a growth market I can see moving forwards, and I think it's just going to get more and more complex in terms of compliance. So we're kind of just about coming to the end of the time here, Girish. So I just had one more kind of question for you, and it's quite an open one. It's just what does the future look like for Sprinto? Where are you trying to get with the company and with the idea over the next sort of 2 to 3 years?
Great question. So, like I was saying earlier, SaaS fundamentally means that my data is on your servers, and people increasingly want some assurance that you're keeping this data safe and secure. And what we really envision with Sprinto is to create this sort of a trust currency for cloud commerce. What I mean by that is, you are increasingly going to get asked questions about whether you're keeping my data safe and secure, and there needs to be some way for you to demonstrate that. And Sprinto is basically playing into that field. In about the next 2 or 3 years specifically, I specifically see two parts of the or two segments of people who have trouble with this. One is the small guys who don't even get like a ticket to this table because they don't have these compliances. And the way we look at it is that our job is to make this a level playing field, where as a SaaS company, you can play on the merit of your product and your feature, and not you're not sort of put out of a deal simply because you don't have these compliances. These are resource intensive, but when you use something like Sprinto, they actually become accessible to you, and you can get there fairly fast, fairly quickly, without actually spending as much effort. So that's one part of the program. Like we look at this as our job is over the next couple of years is to make this a level playing field. When you come to the larger companies, they spend a ton of money and millions of dollars on making themselves more secure, but the people running these programs have no central pane of glass where they have visibility across what's really going on with all the dollars that they are spending. And Sprinto's job over there is to give you like a single source of truth about, this is really what's going on with your compliance program. And you can actually have one place where you know what's really going on, where work is pending and who is it pending on, and so on and so forth. So that's the way I look at Sprinto over the next 2 or 3 years. There is at the end of the day, like any sort of economy requires you to have like a common currency that we all depend on. And I think Sprinto can become that way of actually creating that trust currency, at least in terms of security of your data, over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's the way we look at this internally.
Cool. Exciting. Well, I can't wait to see how much success you have in that journey. And based on, the product and the problem that it's solving, I think it's only going to go up. So thank you so much for the time. I know you're busy, and it's been a fantastic conversation. So really appreciate you coming on the pod today.
I really enjoyed being here, Ben. Thanks for having me again.
Excellent. Well, for those of you at home, thanks for listening, and tune in next time to Growing Tech Fast.